All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our Thursday night New York Giants Preservation Society meeting with returnee Curt Smith. Curt, of course, is the greatest authority on baseball announcers. And tonight he's going to be talking about San Francisco Giant announcers. Previously, he spoke about the New York Giant announcers. And I'm sure he will field any questions. I'm sure a lot of you have a lot to say about Vin Scully and the like. Before we turn attention to Curt, a couple of housekeeping items. I mentioned this last time. Bruce Bochy looks like, according to the Baseball Hall of Fame, he's eligible to be inducted into the Hall of Fame next year. I rented a room out in Oneonta. If anybody's interested in staying at that hotel, you can try to call. I don't know if there's any openings. Usually the day after, they start booking reservations for the following year. But if any of you are interested in any information, contact me and I will forward you the information.
That's great.
There is no meeting scheduled for the next 4 weeks. But rest assured, there'll be a meeting probably next week and the week after. I am waiting. My daughter is very pregnant, and I didn't want to schedule somebody and then tell them that we can't do the meeting. So tomorrow I will get probably somebody for next week and the week after. Just she's supposedly due on the 28th. But I had to leave a few weeks before and after. So I hope everybody understands that we're not going away. Meaning this society is going to be living on. The next two meetings, though, scheduled is September 15th with Rob Garrett. Rob will be talking about the Giants and the Japanese experience, and also talking about his upcoming biography on Charles Stoneham, which will be out next year. And then on 9/22, we have Lou Friedman. Lou wrote a great book on Juan Marichal. So without further ado, I'd love to reintroduce Curt Smith. Again, Curt spoke a couple of months ago on the New York Giants, and today it's going to be the San Francisco Giant announcers. Let's give a round of applause to Professor Curt Smith. Hey. All yours.
Well, thanks, Gary. I appreciate that kind introduction. I'm pleased to be here again tonight to talk about the Giants and the radio TV voices of the game, especially in a week, Gary, you related this, when with Vin Scully's death, broadcasting is so very much on our minds. In April, we spoke about the Giants' early broadcast history. Tonight, we recall the team's exit from the Big Apple 65 years ago, and their announcers since then, as they become members of the family for anyone who truly loves the sport. In 1957, Russ Hodges and Jim Wood, what a team they were, broadcast the franchise's final year in New York. Woods hoped to relocate with lead voice Hodges, but the team, now in California, wanted someone local, and they found that person in Lon Simmons. Woods joined the Pirates for the next 12 years, he and Bob Prince bringing only a pencil and scorecard to the booth. That was it, said Bob. We'd do play-by-play or tap dance if the game stunk. On the last out, Jim turned off his mic. Enough of that, Woods said. Time for booze. This is a man with his priorities in order. In 1957, the sixth-place Giants were bad enough to make you drink. On April 15, 1958, they opened against the Dodgers at their temporary 22,000-seat San Francisco Park. Hodges wrongly calling it the Polo Grounds. I mean Seal Stadium. The home team won 8-0. A full house booed LA, as it should. 3 days later, a league record 78,682 packed the Dodgers' home debut at Memorial Coliseum. In the ninth inning, Jim Davenport scored the tying run, then was called out for missing third base on Willie Kirkland's triple. As a Red Sox fan, I know that old habits are hard to break. Giants lose 6-5. Behind the mic, Russ introduced Simmons, who began a glorious 1958 through 73, 1976 to 78, and 1996 through 2002 Giants Hall of Fame career. For 5 of those years, as we may remember, Bill King, known for a handlebar mustache, Van Dyke beard, and term "holy cow," subbed whenever Simmons aired the football 49ers. Lon had grown up in beautiful downtown Burbank, to quote from the much later television series Laugh-In. After World War II, he joined the Phillies system, tore a shoulder in his first start, and ultimately turned to radio, ultimately KFSO San Francisco. When you're young, Lon said, everything means more. You couldn't get closer to my emotions than the Giants' first year, unquote. There being much to emote about. In 1958, the Giants finished over 500 for the first of 14 straight years. By next season, the Bay Area had bought 600,000 transistors, one visitor thinking them hearing aids, thus the nickname, the City of the Deaf. With most games in the daytime, Giants radio flooded restaurants, offices, bars, and cable cars. Russ and Lon quickly bonding like two veins from a common mind. Simmons called Hodges the fabulous fat man, always adding he was more fabulous than fat. "How you doing, everybody?" the rumpled Russ began each broadcast. Lon replied, "Better than your clothes," joking that Hodges' tailor had asked Russ to take the labels out of his suits since they were ruining the tailor's image. Hodges' favorite label was of the liquid kind. "Here's what we'll do," he told Lon. "If we win the game, we'll drink because we're happy. If we lose, we'll drink because we're sad. The only way we won't drink is if we tie." When one extra inning error tied a game, curfew extending it, Russ smiled, saying, "We're just going to have to break a rule." They did. In 1959, it was Windows that Willie McCovey broke as Rookie of the Year. On September 19, the Giants still led the league, Frisco buzzing about a World Series. But where? Seals was far too small. A new home, Sandalsick Park, was far from ready. The solution was to collapse, to avoid that quandary, which the Giants did, as many of you will remember. The park opened in 1960 on Candlestick Point, overlooking a bay. Soon it lured more contempt than a Don Drysdale beanball. Think of the Giants players, the galaxy of stars of the 1960s. McCovey, Willie Mays, Orlando Cepeda, Juan Marichal, later Gaylord Perry, each class of Cooperstown. Meanwhile, listening in suburban Half Moon Bay outside of the city, future Giants voice John Miller played the board game Stratomatic. In his bedroom, John broadcast to himself his version of the advertisements, vendors, public address announcer, the organist, dum, 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 Miller said in key. The crowd, he would blow like the wind, and Ross or Vin Scully. From Dodger Stadium, friends would say, "Let's hit the beach." John said, "Sorry, I got a big series coming up." His mother wanted to grab John around the neck. Hearing him, friends asked, "Who is this?" His own mother allegedly denied even knowing him, at least according to John. "It sounds, though," she said, "like he has a little bronchial condition." On April 16, 1962, Miller, then age 10, saw his first game at the Stick, later saying, "I had a radio and binoculars so I could hear and see Hodges." Russ would say something, then grab French fries and a drink. As he called to play, "It hits me. Hey, this is the life for me." One day, the Giants homered, back to back to back. Russ thrice crying, "Tell it goodbye," his home run chant. With 7 games left in 62, LA led by 4. That week, the Giants played at day. Russ then recreating the Dodgers on KSFO. On the final day, Mays' homer edged Houston 2-1. Russ then did Dodgers Cardinals play-by-play on Candlestick's public address system to the crowd. Meanwhile, the football 49ers were playing at Kezar Stadium, the crowd listening to the Giants game on transistors, raring on balls and strikes, leading the football players to wonder what was going on. Upon the final out, LA losing St. Louis 1-0, Russ roared, "We have a playoff." We had been this way before. In the playoffs' decisive Game 3, 4 ninth-inning runs gave the Giants a 6-4 pennant. Mays memorably flinging the last out into the bleachers at Dodger Stadium. Take that, he said. Take 1951. The Yankees won the series. In the seventh game, down 1-0, the 62 Giants put 2 runners on with 2 out in the ninth inning. Sadly, that series TV footage was destroyed. Surviving, Simmons on NBC radio. Here's a liner straight to Richardson, Lon said. The ball game is over and the World Series is over. Sadly, Russ Hodges never aired another network baseball game. In 1965 and 6, the Giants lost a last week pennant to LA, still public enemy #1. In New York, owner Horace Stoneham, who had televised his entire home schedule in New York, out west banned home TV. To see the team, base standards had to pay. Everything was fine, said Russ. Then it wasn't. When the A's moved to Oakland, splitting the area, Giants attendance, as in New York in the 1950s, collapsed. Still, Hodges' old shoe lure lingered. Russ retiring in 1970 after seeing all but 2 of Willie Mays' first 663 home runs. The chain smoker died April 19, 1971, at only 60 of a heart attack. Mays wept openly at the funeral. Jim Wood said, "No one will ever know the money Russ gave to charities and guys down on their luck. Hodges never equaled October 3, 1951, but then no one else has either." Deprived of his longtime friend, Lon Simmons remained the Giants' funny man. A crush was admitted by a listener who said that he had had a crush, or she had had a crush on Lon since childhood. Said Simmons, "You must have been terribly deprived." A woman told of falling asleep, radio in bed, to his baritone. "That's okay," Simmons said. "A lot of people fall asleep listening to me." No subject was sacrosanct. Some games were a toss-up. Lon said of one stinker, "This is a throw-up." Another night, the scoreboard read, "Happy birthday, Debbie." Simmons' comment, "Too bad she left in the 3rd inning." One night, the bases were loaded. Lon says, "And I wish we were too." Another game entered the bottom of the 5th. "Boy," he said, "I wish I was at the bottom of the 5th. You will notice a common theme here. Then in 1979, the Giants traded flagship KSFO for KNBR, Lindsey Nelson, for the next 3 years succeeding him. Lon moved to the Crosstown A's, returning to the Giants, as I noted in 1996, to say of pitcher Rob Nen, "It looks like he's trying to overthrow it," which is fine if you're pitching against a government. He retired at 80 in 2003 and moved to Maui, feeding peanuts on his porch, and I love this, to a cardinal he named Stan Musial. California was sad to see him go. "I wish you could broadcast baseball," a woman rude. Simmons said, "That's what they used to tell me in the broadcast booth too." He passed away in 2015 at age 91. His voice with us still. Think of San Francisco's cable cars, drop-dead skyline, and Golden Gate Bridge. Its Giants have also boasted, as we noted in April, more Hall of Fame Ford C. Frick Award honorees for broadcast excellence than any other team. Of the Hall's 46 recipients, a franchise 12 have aired the club. Mel Allen, Hodges, Ernie Harwell, Jack Brickhouse, Arch McDonald, Simmons, Miller, Jim McCarver, King, Al Helfer, and Al Michaels. The Giants' radio TV history also includes recent or current announcers like Hank Greenwald, Mike Krukow, and Dwayne Kuiper, prizing not solemnity, but mirth. Maybe they'll make Cooperstown should. They indeed should, in my view. Born in Detroit, Greenwald was raised in my home city, Rochester, New York, attended nearby Syracuse University, and aired the 1979-2005 Giants, Yankees, A's, and CBS Radio, not all at the same time. Humor bridged them all. In Montreal, Hank said, "When you ask for a non-smoking section, they send you to Buffalo." In June 1985, he turned 50. "It's funny," Greenwald said of the then toxic Giants, "when the season started, I was only 43. Hank did the Giants from 1979 through 86 and 89 through 96. For a long time, Candlestick was engulfed by empty seats. One night, a foul landed among them. Greenwald, gave the section number, adding, anyone coming to tomorrow's game might want to stop and pick it up. One game drew 1,632 people. 1632, Hank blared. That's not a crowd, that's a shirt size. In 1987, he briefly returned east to air the Bronx Bombers, finding, he said, that it's amazing how a couple of years with the Yankees can validate your career. Greenwald then crossed the continent again to find the Giants much improved. What hadn't changed was Greenwald's wit. One night, Hank taped and opened. Good evening, everybody. I'm Hank Greenwald, along with Dwayne Kuiper. We're here at Three Rivers Stadium. The producer told Hank to shorten the open. He tried, but it was still too long. Finally, Greenwald found inspiration. Good evening. I'm Hank Greenwald, along with Dwayne Kuiper, he said. We're here at Two Rivers Stadium. In the 1980s, Greenwald covered two men who later became broadcasters. Kuiper was a Giants infielder who at the time hosted a KNBR talk show. His playing time overlapped with Mike Kruko's, the Giants pitcher who won 20 games in 1986 and joined KNBR in 1990. Since then, their Kruk or Krupp and Kuiper routine has regaled the public. You could say Kruko and Kuiper worked Giants games, said MLB Network's Matt Vasgersian, except that it never seems like work. Named by Bay Area media the Giants' 1980s starting right-handed pitcher, Kruko, like Kuiper, said ESPN's Tim Kurkjian, was a character. One day, a baseball lodged in the webbing of the Giants pitcher Terry Mulholland's glove. The pitcher then threw the mitt, including the ball, to first baseman Bob Brenly for the out. Everyone was impressed, but teammate Kruko. You blew it, he told Brenly. You should have whipped the glove around the infield. It was a preview of things to come. Kuiper made the bigs via the 1972 amateur draft. 2 years later, he became Cleveland's second baseman. At bat, the singles hitter tied a big league record by lashing 2 bases-loaded triples at Yankee Stadium. In the field, Kuiper made then skipper Frank Robinson stand up in the dugout and applaud. Plays that Dwayne had made, literally. In 1981, Kuiper joined the Giants, playing there through 1985. For several years, he did commentary, then aired Rockies play-by-play, returning to Giants radio in 94 and now TV, supplying color. Kruko uses Cructionary, I hope that's pronounced correctly, phrases like grab some pine. Grab some pine, he would say meat. And also things like just another ha-ha laugher of a cardiac game. In 2007, Kuiper said, Barry Bonds hits one, high, hits it deep, out of here, 756, breaking Hank Aaron's home run record. His greatest call was 2010 swing and a miss. The Giants, for the first time in 52, actually 56 years, are world champions. You can't help but think that this group is celebrating, he said, for the Say Hey Kid, for Will the Thrill, celebrating for number 25, and celebrating for all you Giants fans. Each Special K, Kruko and Kuiper, is a 7-time Emmy Award winner, hoisting other titles in 2012 and 14, and doing pregame commentary on radio TV. You also hear Dave Fleming, who growing up outside Washington, heard Miller air the Orioles. In 2003, he joined the Giants as a fill-in for his idol. In his second game, Fleming called a no-hitter. In 2007, he said of a Bonds blast off the facing of the second deck, and Barry Bonds has equaled baseball's all-time home run record, 755. In 2012, Dave called a series title. The celebration begins here in Detroit, he said, upon the 4-game sweep, and we can only imagine San Francisco. By contrast, sadness reigned when in 1989, baseball killed NBC TV's long-running game of the week. No longer would Saturday hinge, as Vin Scully had said for 6 years doing that series, on pulling up a chair. Buying network exclusivity, CBS wanted no part of a weekly package. To fill the void, ESPN TV began Sunday Night Baseball. John Miller, of course, became its voice. and what a voice he was. As we noted, John came of baseball age in the 1962 Giants-Dodgers race. In the World Series, he was in a dentist chair when Bobby Richardson caught McCovey's Game 7 ending drive. Given the pain, he said, how appropriate that I almost bit my dentist's finger. Miller recovered, so presumably did his dentist. In 1974, John signed with the Oakland A's. As a decade later, he joined the Orioles after stints at Texas and Fenway Park, working O's radio while Chuck Thompson did TV. Miller so wowed by Thompson's neighborly voice that John said he didn't care what Chuck said as long as Chuck said it. In 1990, John added Sunday Night Baseball. His ESPN analyst, future Hall of Fame second baseman Joe Morgan. Morgan was a chatterbox. On TV, he learned to parse. When we first started, John said, we didn't always see eye to eye. Miller came from radio, Morgan TV. In time, most like John's lore and Joe's game within the game. Their celebrated twosome is how many recall Morgan best. In 1991, Miller won his first of 2 Cable Ace Awards for his coverage on ESPN, feeling his honors were undeserved. What am I, he asked the audience. I go to games, and my best lines are, low, ball 1, or probably the line I'm most proud of, he said, line drive foul. Don't talk to John about money, he said. I'm an artiste, you know. Miller also announced ESPN's All-Star Game in postseason and a September 6, 1995 regular season game that became official after 4.5 innings. History, said Miller, Cal Ripken Jr.'s record 2,131st straight game. He chose that night to work Orioles radio at Camden Yards, a Baltimore thing, he said, instead of ESPN's national game. In the 4th inning, President Bill Clinton came on the Orioles air, Ripken working a 3-0 count. John made a little funny. This night of all nights, he said, maybe you could send a presidential order, he told Bill Clinton down there, ordering the pitcher to throw a strike. I know one thing, the president said, Cal wants to hit this pitch, but if it's not a strike, he'll take the walk for the good of the team, because that's the kind of guy he is. That's very true, John said. On the other hand, if he grooves one, even on 3-0, oh, then Cal will hit it a long way, Clinton said. At that very moment, true story, Cal swung. Boom, home run. John began describing it, but Clinton, who had his own microphone, started yelling. He was clapping his hands, shouting into the mic, and helping to call the homer. What did Miller do? What could he do? Unable to steal the mic from a president of the United States, all John could provide was, as he said, disembodied background noise. Later, John said tongue-in-cheek, the bad news was that it kind of put me off, because this was a major moment in baseball history. The good news, he continued, mattered more. He was president of the United States, the first fan. He's reflecting the excitement of the night. Plus, Miller thought, I could now put on my resume, worked with Bill Clinton, president of the United States, a very close friend. John was happy in his adopted burg until in 1996, new Orioles owner Peter Angelos complained. John should bleed orange and black, Baltimore's colors, of course. Once in a while, just once, negotiating his new pact, Miller left after Angelos unbelievably refused to take John's agent's phone calls. Fittingly, Miller, of course, returned to your team, to his home, to the Bay. Everywhere, John Miller has been a natural comic and mimic, mimicking Chuck Thompson, Harry Carey, and the best for last, imitating Vin Scully in English, Spanish, and Japanese. He also had the good fortune to run smack dab into Giants history. On October 4, 2001, Barry Bonds whacked his Mark McGwire tying 70th home run. Next day, he faced Chin-Ho Park at then Pacific Bell Park. Miller said, there's a high drive deep into right center field to the big ball part of the ballpark, number 71, he said of Bonds. 6 years later, he called another record, 656, more home runs, he said, in 2000. the team opened at Pac-Bell Park. In 2000, the team, as I said, opened at Pac-Bell Park. Hodges would have liked that. In 2010, even more. The Giants' first world title, as we've said, since 1954. Miller emceed a City Hall salute, as only he could, to the club's post-57 history. The panorama, he added, crying, "Bye, bye, baby, salute to Russ." That year, ESPN TV inexplicably, unbelievably, canned him and Morgan. Miller opted to call Giants wireless instead of ESPN radio. Then in 2014, a great pitcher retired the World Series final batter. And the Giants have won, said John Madison Bumgarner, etching his name as one of the greatest World Series pitchers in the game has ever seen. After no World Series titles in 56 years, the Giants had won 3 in the last 5. But why? The great musical, South Pacific, perhaps explained it best. Fools give you reasons, wise men never try. In a moment, I'll welcome your wise questions and hopefully my adequate response. Thank you for inviting me again. Thank you very much.
Curt, that was fabulous. Really.
Thank you.
Can't thank you enough for coming. We will take questions. I have a few, if you don't mind.
No. Well, let me as a preface that I have had a lot of material to work with.
One is about the Giant announcers, and the other one's just about baseball in general. Where did the networks decide on what we would like? In other words, what makes me want to watch Alex Rodriguez doing a game and all of these network guys? I don't understand who is making these decisions that I need to hear David Ortiz.
Oh,
I don't, every guy who retires seems to get a job.
well, as a Red Sox fan, even I have problems with Big Papi, at least in this role. Regarding Alex Rodriguez, I guess baseball just likes modest announcers. That's all. No, it's a horrific team that ESPN has put together. I think the question, or answer to that question rather, lies in the respect or lack of respect, the knowledge or lack of knowledge, the passion or lack of passion that networks have for baseball. I think in many ways, the problems that you relate to refer to the product itself. The baseball that is now being played is not the baseball that you and I knew when we were children. They need to, of course, as we know, put a time. They need to, if you look back at World Series footage from the early 1950s, Vic Raschi of the Yankees throws the ball. Pee Wee Reese either swings or does not. He throws it back. The ball is thrown back to the pitcher. Raschi immediately winds up and fires a fast one. Reese does not step out. Pitchers do not fiddle from here to the 12th of never on the mound. And the irony of this is that those two restrictions, as well as calling a high strike so that every count doesn't run to 3-2 and beyond, these restrictions are already on the books. The commissioner of baseball, Ron Madfred, anytime in the last 4 to 5 years as commissioner, could have, in effect, talked with umpires and demanded, according to the power, if you would, and prestige of the commissioner's office and the laws that are on the books, that he tell the umpire not to let the batter step out, period. Did he tell the pitcher you've got a certain amount of time to throw the pitch, and if you surpass that, it's the ball. And then, of course, get rid of the shift, things of that ilk, so that actually we return to something called baseball. Baseball as it was played for more than a century, up into the last 10 to 15 years. You cannot look at polling data or television ratings, which have shown baseball interest plunging and ratings absolutely collapsing. So I can't blame the networks in that sense. The product has not been as good as some other sports, notably pro football. But in terms of announcers, they think that big names make great announcers, that former players make great announcers, that talking endlessly about fastball versus the curveball, becoming a seminar, if you would, of pitcher and catcher. They think that that's what fans want. They don't. Scully once talked about how too many announcers treat numbers like a drunk treats a lamppost for support, not illumination. And that's absolutely true. These people should take a course in Vin Scully 101. Enough tape exists, enough Q&As with him, enough stories have been written about him. Basically, not to have them imitate Scully, but to understand why he made baseball magic. That's my long answer to your question. But the lack of baseball interest, particularly among young people, drives the lack of respect for networks toward the game today.
Thank you. Couple of other quick comments. With Scully unfortunately passing, we always talk about Willie Mays being the greatest player, a living player, if not, player of all time. We had John Miller on, and I feel that with Scully not around, John is by far the greatest announcer in baseball today.
I share that view. I share
and
that.
Two other things. One's a comment. One of the Giant announcers who I started hearing when they opened up the new park was Ted Robinson, who I thought was a very good announcer.
Yes.
And the other thing is, you mentioned the Hall of Fame.
Mhm.
Is Lindsey Nelson not in the Hall?
Lindsey Nelson is in the Hall.
Oh, he is in the Hall. Okay.
He isn't. He's one of the voices that I mentioned probably too quickly.
Yeah, he was fabulous with the Mets.
He was a fabulous human being. When I wrote Voices of the Game in the 1980s and began calling up announcers that I had never talked to, and that they didn't know me from Curt Gowdy, but they were very kind. And I'll tell you the two that really stood out to me over the telephone in terms of their depth of character and their different sides of persona. Very bright men. Lindsey Nelson was one. He could talk about World War II, where he was the publicist for Dwight Eisenhower. He could talk endlessly of Casey Stengel and the 1962 Mets. He read books on planes, non-baseball books, just like Scully did. Vin told me once that on road trips, my best friend is a book. And he meant non-baseball books, non-sports books, poetry they read, both of them, history they read endlessly. And so they had different sources that they could refer to in a game, simply beyond the magic of the four stem or whatever it is, four seam curveball. When they get into a seminar like that, I'm screaming at the television, who cares? Do you have any idea who your audience is? Announcing is a storytelling medium. That's nothing new. Lincoln thrived on stories. Homer thrived on stories. Franklin Roosevelt invented a piano player of his who never existed to tell stories. So I wish baseball had a broadcast school in which all announcers could look at footage of the great broadcasters and perhaps the not so great to draw a contrast and begin to develop the household names in the booth that were so common when I was young and when most of you were young. Scully was the best of the best. He, without question, quoting from The Natural, is the best there ever was. Everything, as John Miller said, that you would want in a broadcaster, you found in Scully. Thank goodness we've got copious film and print references to him. But I think broadcasters, in the sense that broadcast today, they should go back to school.
Thank you, Curt. We're going to go to Harvey, Mars, Bob, and then Jeff. Harvey, you're up.
It's a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
The sports and the baseball announcers are so much a part of the game. I grew up here in New York with Russ doing the Giants games. Vince Scully was doing the Dodgers games. Mel Allen and Red Barber. Red had moved from the Dodgers to the Yankees by the time I was able to breathe. And what a group. I became a Giants fan, and I still am. Just a couple of comments. Dwayne Kuiper in 2010, which us Giants fans will always love, as we do 2012 and 2014.
Right.
But Kuiper coined a phrase to describe what the Giants were doing in winning the games. He said, it's torture.
Yeah, right.
And the Giants used that as a promotional tool. It was a wonderful description. And I always laughed when he said it. It was torture. But
Right.
after Kipe said torture, you had to laugh. And it was usually after the Giants won a game.
Right.
John Miller, I can't remember the specific game, but Barry Bonds had twisted his ankle or sprained his ankle, and he was limping down the clubhouse steps. And of course, I was worried and whatnot. And an inning or so later, Dave Fleming says, the report from the Giant clubhouse is Barry is day to day.
Yes,
And John Miller, yeah, you're shaking your head.
I do know.
Miller goes, Dave, we're all day to day.
Yeah, that is a wonderful companion to Vin Scully. I wrote this week, if you have access to your computer, to the Sports Broadcast Journal, which is published by David J. Halberstam. And I wrote two very long pieces on Scully, one taking him through, sad to say, the farewell to Ebbets Field. I'm too young to remember the Brooklyn Dodgers. I feel cheated even now as a Red Sox fan, because there's so many similarities between the two franchises. But Scully, a number of years back, said he was, I know, it was Andre Dawson. I don't remember whether he was the Expos or the Cubs at the time, but he was injured. And Scully said he's listed day by day. Aren't we
Scully
all?
said it too.
But it's a lovely line. The one about torture certainly embodies too many ball clubs. But they become, you mentioned Scully, Harges, Mel Allen, household names, bigger than life, extended members of the family, known from coast to coast. I grew up in upstate New York, listening to the Yankee games on radio. We didn't have regional television at that point, but I listened to Allen day by day, and I heard old footage as well. Although Vin Scully is without doubt the greatest broadcaster in not simply baseball but sports history, to me, Mel Allen in the 50s and in the early 60s, before he declined and left in 1964, he had the greatest instrument of a voice in broadcast history. Maybe Edward R. Murrow was as good, but Allen's was spectacular. And the best evidence of that is that he was the voice, as some may remember, of movie tone newsreels. 3,000 movie tone newsreels shown coast to coast every week. He was the voice. And then, of course, all of us remember his comeback in 1977 when he became not simply the voice of, he became the show, This Week in Baseball.
Yep.
Only Allen could have done with that wonderful voice, for which I guess God takes credit and should. He was an institution, just like Scully is. And, they broadcast the World Series together in 1953, 55, and 56. I've also listened, as perhaps you have on footage, to Allen and Barber in 1952. You pick them. I can't. In terms of Barber was wonderful, but I think in terms of length of career, the quality, the voice, the affinity, the decency, the knowledge that sometimes you have to let silence, not rhetoric, carry the day. To me, Vin Scully is the greatest announcer who ever lived.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Curt, I forgot to mention, Scully was talked about this week on WFAN on Saturday.
Yes.
And your name came up.
Right.
By Richard Neer. And I said to myself, this is great. We have this baseball announcer authority he's talking about, and he's coming to speak to our group. So I just
I
want to let you
appreciate
know
that. You're very kind, and this is non-paid political announcement. At
All right.
I think at 4:30 is the time tomorrow on Sirius XM. I'll be on with the great Ed Randall and Kevin Kennedy to talk.
Buddy, Ed Randall, our buddy.
Yeah.
All right, if you want to send me the link, I'm sure a lot of the guys would like to hear that. If
All right.
There's a
I'll
link
see what I can
available.
do. Yeah.
Okay,
But,
Mars, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, and they weren't alone. New York was especially blessed. Ernie Harwell broadcast for the Dodgers and Giants. Russ Hodges, of course, was the voice of the Giants. Curt Gowdy did the Yankees. Jim Woods did the Yankees in the 50s when you had Barber, Allen, and Woods. Try topping that trifecta. So it didn't matter. I wish only that the guy upstairs had brought me here a few years earlier so that I could remember the Polo Grounds, Ebbets Field, and that wonderful trifecta of teams with so many Hall of Famers in the booth. It doesn't get any better. It can't get any better than that.
Mars, you're up.
All right. Well, thank you, Curt, for joining us.
Thank you.
I want to point out a few things. First, I'll bring up Alex Rodriguez. Knowledgeable, but it's such a sham. I guess Alfred E. Newman from Mad Magazine spearheaded him to announce on ESPN. But this is a sham for a guy on 60 Minutes that lied in front of Katie Couric
I know.
that he did not take steroids, and yet he is hired as an announcer for ESPN is a total sham.
Well,
But now
yeah,
I want to mention.
yeah, you're
the
right. But let me
concept-
point out again, ESPN has shown its total disrespect and lack of interest in baseball in as many possible ways as you can. And this is, in my view, the latest blow against any kind of common sense.
Well, now I'd like to point out the great announcers that I listened to over the years. So I did listen to Hodges, and when Brooklyn was still in New York, I hardly listened to Scully because I was listening to Russ Hodges, and I got more familiar with Scully when the teams moved out to the West Coast, and he did the games of the week. He did football games.
Right.
He did the World Series and all that. And that's how I became more familiar with Scully than when he was announcing with Brooklyn.
Right.
I also, listened to Mel Allen and Red Barber, and the Southern styles of their announcing, I embrace, especially the expressions that both use, especially, with Red Barber, the rhubarb and all that. And, then one announcer that I don't think you mentioned, but he recreated the games when the teams moved to the West Coast.
Right.
And that was Les Kiter on
Yeah.
tape recreated radio. He
Yeah.
was tremendous.
Yeah.
And I faithfully listened to those games at roughly 4:30 in the afternoon and 11:15 at night,
Right.
taking that transistor radio with the wire, all that. And then the games would end at 2 a.m. And I would tell my mom, "Oh, Mom, I'm not feeling well. I'm too sick to go to school." She says, "I know you've been listening to the ball game all night. You're going to school."
Well, that's yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Then now a couple of guys that didn't announce for the Giants, Bob Prince and Jack Buck, that did all kinds of sports, were terrific, And when Jack Buck did the Monday night games with Hank Stram, I was working at night, so I didn't have the advantage of watching it on TV, and I could do without Howard Cosell anyway. But Jack Buck and Hank Stram were great football announcers on radio. And now that I'm up at my property in Mendocino County, I'm listening to Dave Fleming and John Miller. And Dave Fleming is terrific. He knows the ins and outs of the game. And of course, John Miller, we all know is great. Lon Simmons, I embrace, I love, the game is so different now. And you really have to love the game. You talk about people that watch complete games and watch baseball, when there were those complete games, and when you had the color line was broken, was the best era of the 1950s to me in baseball, when there was only 8 teams in a league. So today you really have to love the game to announce it. And Croup and Kite are great. Miller and Dave Fleming are terrific, but to me, the way when you were able to recreate a game, tape delayed, Les Kiter is my favorite of all time.
Yeah, it's interesting. When we were together in April, I mentioned Kiter in terms of those 3 years. I probably should have mentioned him tonight, although it was San Francisco. Those 3 years of 58 through 60, which must have been such a heartbreak for Giant fans. I put myself in the position of a Brooklyn or a Giants fan in 1958. And I think of a parallel would have been the Boston Red Sox leaving Fenway Park. And that to me would be like a meteor crashing and destroying the earth, and in many ways, I understand the need for greater attendance, but baseball, in my view, should have intervened, kept those two teams here, built ballparks if they needed them, and then each team could have used a sane plan of expansion by baseball by giving an expansion team in 1958 to Los Angeles and San Francisco. That would have avoided a generation of fans who are quite bitter, and justifiably so, at what happened to their team. But yes.
Can you imagine when O'Malley turned down Flushing Meadows to Robert Moses, saying who would want to move to a swamp? Horace Stoneham, if he had any business acumen, would have said, well, I'll take it and let O'Malley go wherever he wants.
Let me give you a date here. The Dodgers win the World Series, their first ever, in 1955. The borough explodes. The team that couldn't win a World Series, the beloved Bums, finally does. Following spring or winter, but it was before the next season, Walter O'Malley was seen in a helicopter above Chavez Ravine. He was casing the joint already. Now, I don't understand how someone born in New York could have done that. That's simply my view. It's rather incidental now, so many years after the fact. But I've always thought that in terms of decency, O'Malley could have shown a great deal more in terms of how he treated his hometown.
Well, O'Malley was a shrewd business person, and Horace Stoneham was a silver spoon brat.
Yeah, I know.
So O'Malley had the wherewithal, and he saw the gold mine in L.A.
Right, but he could have had that, is my point. If he could have kept the franchise, the Los Angeles franchise, sold the Dodgers, but kept an expansion team in Los Angeles, he would have reaped the financial dividend that way, instead of the extraordinarily unfortunate, feeling way that he did.
Let's move on. Bob, you're up. Bob Kate?
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, Curt. Absolutely wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
I can't remember when MLB audio came online, maybe 20, 25 years or so ago, but for someone who was, a 10, 12-year-old kid growing up in Chicago, listening to out of town, listening to, Cubs and White Sox games, and then out of town games as well. This is absolute, this is a dream for any kid that grew up during the 50s or 60s, though, to have this abundance, though.
Oh, yeah.
But my question is, and an observation I'd like to get your opinion on, is I remember talking to Corey Provis, who's the Twins announcer here in Twin Cities, and he made an interesting observation. He, of course, worked with Bob Uecker with the Brewers as an analyst and play-by-play guy, and then moved on to the Cubs, where he worked with Ron Santo, a former third baseman.
Right.
And now he's with the Twins, and his broadcast partner is Dan Gladden, a former outfielder, though.
Right.
And he made the point that working with three former players of different positions, how you get to see a similar play three different ways, or explained three different ways by the different positions that they played, and it was so illuminating to me, because you always think there's only a couple of one or two ways to describe the play from the broadcast booth. Though I'd like to get your observation on that.
Yeah, well, I think that to some extent Fox is trying to do that with the television coverage now, and certainly the national radio hookup that allows you to hear teams. I remember as a kid growing up a small town outside of Rochester, and we were very well situated in the Northeast to hear the great majority of the then 20 teams. I could hear Harry Carey from St. Louis at that time, just a superlative announcer, bigger than the show, bigger than the Cardinals. There was Jack Buck from St. Louis at the time, one of the truly great Renaissance broadcasters. By that I mean can do football, can do baseball, he did bowling. He may have been, I am told, the greatest host, if you would, of dinners in the entire country, at least for sports. So St. Louis was very fortunate. And then, of course, in Minnesota, where you are, Ray Scott, who was the very first voice of the Twins, better known for football, but also a fine baseball announcer. Merle Harmon, one of God's nature's noblemen, to quote Shakespeare, and Herb Carneal, the latter two in the Hall of Fame. So Ernie Harwell in Detroit, Wade Hoyt in Cincinnati, Jimmy Dudley, a wonderful Southern broadcaster, was mentioned here, not mentioned, but he too was a spectacular. To this day, Dudley is referred to by many people living in Cleveland as the Indians, greatest announcer ever. So every town had someone, and then of course Curt Gowdy in Boston, Ned Martin, just a spectacular announcer for the Red Sox for many years. So it was a different cut than today. All players can add a certain panache to a broadcast, but by and large, they have not been nearly the value to the game or the treasure of the game that players than persons who grew up hoping to be a broadcaster. And you mentioned the different sayings that Hodges and Scully had. Mel Allen made, how about that? A national institution. And I will tell you, growing up in upstate during the late 50s, the early 60s, you couldn't go anywhere. The Rochester Zoo, the Buffalo Zoo, to a park, to a beach, it didn't matter. There was the transistor radio, and there was Mel Allen. And I miss those days because you don't find them by and large today. And baseball needs to face that and to address it with some drama and some theater.
Yeah, in Chicago we had Jack Brickhouse with Hey Hey.
Hey,
And that was
hey.
his day. But he got a lot of gruff for being too much of a homer.
Well,
though,
I know,
you know.
but Chicago has always been, dating back to the 1920s, a team or a town rather, which prefers its announcers to be not partisan or prejudiced, but at least favorable to the home team. And of course, Brickhouse was a wonderful person and truly a great announcer. Today, I should mention Pat Hughes of the Cubs. Pat Hughes, who, for those of you who haven't seen his video series, I think Baseball Voices, the careers of people like Brickhouse, like Prince, like Scully, like Allen, got about 16 of them, 16 CDs of their career with their biographies and quotes from some writers. And then, of course, the play-by-play. He belongs in Cooperstown, in my view, simply for that, in addition to being a wonderful voice of the Cubs.
Thanks, Bob. Jeff Cohen, you're up.
Thank you, and great presentation, Kirk. I just have a couple of questions. One, you have a great voice. Were you ever an announcer?
No, I have a circuitous route. I went to school in upstate New York, then went into politics. I've always loved politics, and I've always loved baseball. So I was in politics, including working in the White House for President Bush 41 for 4 years, and then decided after Bush had been thrown, and his 400 closest aides, had been thrown out by the American public in 1992. What do you do since then? And I've done in upstate New York quite a bit of radio, not baseball radio, but radio talking about baseball and television as well. So, in my case, since I couldn't do anything else, I've forged to life based on speaking and writing.
Well, you have a great voice.
Thank you.
I've been a native New Yorker. I've grown up with the Mets and with my formative years with Lindsey Nelson, Ralph Kiner, Bob Murphy,
Right.
and later on, we're fortunate to have
Gary Cohen.
Gary Cohen.
Cohen belongs in Cooperstown. As a member of the Ford C. Frick Award Committee, the 10 writers or broadcasters who, in a sense, along with the present Hall of Famers, vote every year. And I'm only speaking for myself, but Pat Hughes belongs in Cooperstown. Joe Castiglione of the Red Sox, beloved throughout New England, belongs there. Gary Cohen should be an absolute cinch.
Mhm.
Every quality that you would want in a broadcaster, he has. And he reminds me of, as you mentioned, Kiner,
Ralph Kiner, right?
Murphy.
And Bob Murphy,
Nelson. It
and
doesn't get any better than that.
and now we have Howie Rose. But
Yeah. The radio.
yes. So a couple things. Vince Scully, which was mentioned two times, obviously, no one better than Vince Scully.
Yeah.
But would his style be hired in today's environment?
Well, I hope so. I realize we have, how shall I put it? A guttural age which frowns on reading, which so many of the things that made Scully great. Scully broadcast every sport you can think of, major sport, including golf and tennis, and of course pro football. He never descended to meet his audience. He always asked, without asking, but in a way that invited his audience to rise to meet him. And that is a great quality in a broadcaster. By respecting your audience enough, you ask them to inhale what he's doing, whether it be a quote from Shakespeare or talking about Bob Uecker or his Brooklyn Boyhood, and I would like to think so, because so many broadcasters today, again, they don't understand that it's theater and drama, as well as simply balls and strikes. And I think we need to ask more broadcasters today as well, because I think much more would be emanating from them if someone asked.
And one final question, and I know everybody loves their home team broadcasters, which is great. When it comes to the World Series time, it's only Fox broadcast.
Yeah.
Would it be so hard with the technology today to have another channel with the home team's broadcasters and using the Fox feed? This way they get all the advertising, but the two teams in the World Series, you get to hear your own broadcasters. Is that so difficult?
In a perfect way, that would be wonderful, because look at the broadcasters we had because of the rule that home team broadcasters in the series, only they could announce, only one broadcaster for each league. We got Mel Allen, we got Barbara, we got we got Scully for many years, we got Buck, we got Carey, we got Prince, we got all the great announcers. By contrast to that, when Fox was doing exclusive coverage, we had, I think it was for 14 straight years, Joe Buck doing the World Series. And nothing against Joe personally, but he many times said that he got more enjoyment and more fulfillment from broadcasting a football game than he did from doing a Saturday baseball game of the week. And I think a lot of fans were really appalled by that. They resented it. They were quite right to resent it. And also you're inviting overexposure, and that happened to Buck. So I agree. The problem is the network broadcasting the World Series now would never agree to your alternative, because your alternative, in my view, would have higher ratings.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Curt, how are we for time? We have a lot of questions still. Are we good?
Sure, my pleasure.
All right, let's go to the clean shaven one. John McLaughlin.
Well, thank you, Gary. Thank you, Curt. Great presentation.
Sure, thank you.
And well, before I ask my question, one of my favorite stories about a broadcaster is someone who you mentioned, Ernie Harwell, traded for a backup catcher. One of my favorite stories of all time. Also, you've talked about the good broadcasters, and I guess locally we've had some of the bad ones here in New York. I'm specifically talking about John Sterling and Susan Waldman. And no offense to them personally, and Sterling's been there over 30 years, so hats off to him. But Susan Waldman, especially. I understand all the criticism of her, but as a pioneer of women's broadcasting, is she a Hall of Famer?
Well, she's a Hall of Famer for the National Radio Hall of Fame.
Well, yeah.
The vote was announced a couple days ago, and I, as an emeritus member of the hall, gets the chance to vote. And I found Susan's selection refreshing. She is at her best when it comes to analysis and interview. I will stick up as a Red Sox fan for John Sterling. He is, after all, 84, but he does bring almost all of the qualities to the mic that you would want. From theater, I think he probably still has the best voice in baseball, a knowledge of baseball, an ability to tell a story, knows when to get in and out before commercial. In my view, I'm talking to many people, Sterling's biggest enemy is himself. I don't know that he has an inflated self-esteem, but to many people, he sounds like he does. And that's a turnoff. And it will be interesting to see whether Sterling is inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame. But New York has been blessed, as I said at the start. Bill Rizzuto, for example, he never pretended to be a true baseball announcer. You were lucky with Rizzuto, as you were with Dizzy Dean, to get the score in his 4.5 innings. But he was a wonderful play actor. He was a personality. He was larger than life. He kept interest alive even when his teams were not. And that's a marvelous testimony to him. Harry Carey told me once, as a broadcaster, you have to know when the game carries itself and when you have to carry the game. If it's 3-2, game carries you. If it's 20-1, you have to carry the game. And not every broadcaster is capable of that. Sterling, to his credit, I think has been.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right, let me give you the order here. We got Andy, Jerry, the other Andy, Baumgartner, Paul, Renee, George. So we're gonna go to Andy McHugh.
Sure.
Andy McHugh, you're up.
Curt?
Yes.
Okay, I was just wondering if you're thinking of doing an updated version of your Scully biography.
Well, I was rereading at least the contents, and I don't know. I mean, it could be easily done, I think, probably in terms of bringing it up to date. You would have to do it quickly, and I think that's the problem. At least for me right now with my schedule. But he deserves another book. My book, Pull Up a Chair, is the only book done on him ever. And I'm proud of the book. But then I had a lot of material to work with. I'll tell you, the challenge of the Scully book, it came out, I think, in 28, was that even that was quite clearly the best. There wasn't anything to criticize. He was the best at his field. How could I be worthy of him? And I could tell you that, particularly in terms of accuracy, he's a bug for being correct, or was, on any figure or statistic or anecdote that you want. And so it's like trying to equal perfection. I don't think I did, obviously, but it was the best I could do, and I'm glad I did it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Jerry Austin.
Hi, I grew up like many of you in New York in the 50s, listening to the great Mel Allen, Red Barber, and Vin Scully when he was with the Dodgers, Happy and Felton and Knothole gang, and
Yeah.
had my transistor radio like some of you listen to Les Kiter. I moved to Ohio in the mid 60s, and I would go out to the outdoor parking lot where my car was whenever the Giants were playing St. Louis, because KMOX was a major station. I could pick up the games and became a fan of Jack Buck. And Jack Buck was, and if he would have been in New York instead of St. Louis, although he got a lot of accolades, I think he would be, not with, no one's like Vin Scully, but he'd be way up there. So I want to just, one other thing is to mention that the person I enjoy now listening to, who's not with a team, but it's Dan Shulman. I think
Yes.
Dan Shulman does a great job
Yes.
with not only baseball, but basketball. And I think he's somebody,
Yeah.
that I think many of you may enjoy watching.
He's the voice of the Toronto Blue Jays, and he's a fine announcer. He really is. Has won awards, particularly in Canada, his home country. Bushel full of honors, richly deserved. I think that is a very fine announcer. I hope that he's not overlooked. He too belongs in Cooperstown, my view, for what it's worth. And has been a Blue Jays voice now for, gosh, 20, 25 years, dating back to the 1990s. Buck would have been a star anywhere. He actually broadcast AAA baseball in 1953, 52 or 53, the year before he joined the Cardinals, in my hometown of Rochester, New York. The Red Wings, then the Cardinals AAA Farm Club. And he, as I said, could the versatility that Buck had, going from one sport to the other, was stunning. If you read any of the books that I've written, they generally include a section on Buck. And he makes the point that a baseball announcer really has to be good because his fans in his sport know so much. We're not simply fans, we're fanatics. And, if he makes a mistake, we catch it. And, if there's an omission, we catch it. I think that Buck certainly belongs in the hall. I'm trying to think of some of the other broadcasters that have been mentioned. Everyone really had going into the 70s and the 80s, certainly someone who would be known nationally, at least in some way. Buck, incidentally, was on network television, of course, later with CBS, and particularly with CBS Radio, in which he was superb. But in 1959, after the Dodgers and Giants had skipped town, Budweiser sponsored a series of Dodger games, road games of teams like St. Louis and Milwaukee and the rest of the National League clubs, so that in those 44 games, someone in New York could still follow his Dodgers. And the reaction to that series was so great for Buck that it really, as he said, opened the eyes, as it were, of the sponsors and the network officials in New York. In 1960, he did the very short live ABC baseball television game of the week. He was against Dizzy Dean, and that was no contest. No one was close to Dean in terms of television ratings. And that was his ticket to doing network coverage later on. But you're absolutely right. And then Kerry, of course, who became nationally known, as he should, when cable television dawned. I remember when cable TV dawned in the 1980s, it was like, heaven had come to me. Baseball and network television, night after night, was better than an open bar. And, you caught some of the great voices then. And then, of course, Kerry became really, institution doesn't do that term justice. He became and did the ads for Budweiser, Cub fan, Budman. He became a character, really larger than the game.
Thank you, Jerry. Mr. Baumgartner, you're up. Andy, unmute.
Every week. You can hear me now, right?
Yep.
Yes.
First of all, Curt, I could listen to you all day. All of this is subjective. To me,
You're right.
You're up there with Vince Scully. As good as Vince Scully. No, I'm serious. Okay, I don't want to. Okay, first of all,
Yeah.
you mentioned Russ Hodges.
That's the kindest compliment anyone
Well,
could give me.
For what you do anyway, there's no one even close to analyze these broadcasters. Your facts, all your information, it's incredible. So I'll just add a couple of quick things.
Sure.
You mentioned what Russ Hodges did in '62. Luckily, some of this is on the internet. Vince Scully, brilliantly in 1966, the last day of the year, and a lot of these guys know I didn't. I mean, I knew some of it. It was a tough win for the Phillies against the Dodgers. The Giants pulled one out on McCovey's home run.
Right.
And then the Dodgers needed Sandy to win the second game.
Yeah.
Well, Vince stayed on between games of the doubleheader, and the ticker wasn't working. The print wasn't all there. It's just brilliant. You can find that on YouTube.
Yes.
Last day of the season, 66, and Vin did that. And you mentioned so many: Ned Martin, him and Jim Woods, 74 to 78. Phil Rizzuto, when he had to work with Red and Mel, he leveled. He could do play-by-play. His call
He
on
did.
Harris's home run is
Yes.
perfect. And last but not least,
Pardon me, he became a
Go ahead, Curt.
personality after Barbara and Alan retired.
right, he
Rizzuto,
went
yeah.
more for the cannolis and things
Yeah.
like that.
Right.
And then last but not least, I know you're on the committee. A lot of people will forget this guy. He died tragically in a car accident in 1965, Jack Quinlan.
Right.
Words?
He was a superb announcer. He did the 1960 World Series on radio for NBC. And you're right, at 36 years old, he was killed in that accident. Cooperstown, the Frick Committee, I know is subjective, but we do try to be as nonpartisan as we can, relying on statistics. The longevity, I think, might be held against him, hardly through any fault of his own. But, you know, we keep at it. I wish that more than one Frick recipient could be honored each year. That is not going to happen. So we just have to be wiser and more judicious in terms of the people we choose. We choose well, we choose, I think, certainly pay enormous attention to it. Because even broadcasters, I've had broadcasters in football and baseball tell me that of the single individual honors in those sports, honoring announcers, Frick Award towers above the rest.
Oh, shit.
So, but you're very kind. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy.
Thank you.
Mr. Paul, you're up. Paul Ellis Graham.
Curt, thank you so much.
Thank you.
As a fellow Red Sox and Giants fan, I just wanted to get your feelings on Jerry Remy and Dennis Eckersley as announcers for the Red Sox.
Well, certainly they were personalities. They were both fine former players. Jerry Remy, had he not been hurt, might have had a Hall of Fame career. And of course, Dennis Eckersley, the act, had a great career. And then both of them developed enormous allegiances in New England. I know I'm biased a little bit. My mother was born in Worcester, 40 miles west of Boston. But you can make a case that New England may be the most rabid baseball region of the country. I know there are those in St. Louis who will say the Midwest, they have a case, and a lot of other areas do too. But the sheer zealotry and the fidelity of the Red Sox fans' loyalty to the Sox in good and bad, and trust me, this could be one of the worst years since the Red Sox finished last in 2012. At least they picked good announcers. Joe Castiglione, as I said, is a treasured commodity throughout New England. Jerry Remy was taken to heart by the 6 New England states, in large part because of the courage he had shown amid numerous injuries, and then of course the humor and the baseball knowledge that he brought to the game. And the Eck has his own vocabulary. He and Krukow and Piper would be in good company, I think. And he too has brought a marvelous dimension to the Red Sox TV booth.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I agree.
Thank you.
Renee, you're up.
Gary, thank you for bringing up that John McLaughlin is here. I wouldn't have known the clean shaven one is here. Nice to see you, John. Curt, fabulous presentation, fabulous answers to all these questions. I really enjoyed everything you've been saying. And one thing in particular that has stuck with me up to this point, you mentioned you wish you were younger.
Yes.
I wish you were a lot younger so that you would be commissioner of baseball and you would stop the Giants and Dodgers from leaving New York.
Well.
Thank you for
I'll tell
saying that. I loved it.
That
Crazy.
I wrote in a book that came out a couple years ago, Presidents in the Pastime. And this happened when Dwight Eisenhower was president. And Ike, who was dismissed when he left office, is now, according to a poll of even liberal historians, the fourth greatest president in American history. But I followed him enormously for what he did not do regarding baseball. Richard Nixon was his vice president, a baseball nut who was once offered in 1965 the commissionership of baseball. He turned it down because, as Nixon said, I had other plans. But Eisenhower picked Nixon to basically utilize baseball's antitrust exemption. They could have threatened O'Malley, Stoneham, and George Frick, who at least officially was commissioner of baseball, and basically said, look, you're not going to do this to the nation's largest city. You can have owners of teams in San Francisco and Los Angeles. They're both virginal markets, no major league competition. You'll make a mint, which is really what O'Malley was interested in, but that was never done. And instead, we had broken hearts, and still do, of two of the most fabled teams, the New York Giants and the Brooklyn Dodgers, in history. Let me also, incidentally, because I don't want to omit a couple broadcasters, I should have mentioned Ted Robinson, a very fine broadcaster with the Giants. San Francisco is so fortunate with its baseball broadcast legacy. There are some cities, no, I'm not mentioning names, whose broadcasters are fine but unstirring, and they don't broaden baseball interest. San Francisco's has and does, and Robinson is one of those. And of course, we also have, I'm trying to remember one of the ones that was just mentioned. Here, I wrote it down, I think. Well, whatever. If I omit any broadcaster that should be in the hall, my regret. So.
Well, Curt, thank you for everything. And yeah, I wish you would have been commissioner and stopped this. Thank you for everything. Thanks again.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, George, you're up. Unmute, George.
I don't have my hand up, but it was a very interesting presentation tonight. And I remember, all these going back, all these announcers also, and they're really part of a wonderful tradition. I like some of the modern ones. I think Howie Rosen in New York is wonderful, and just a great presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Curt, I got a few other comments for you.
One broadcaster that I didn't mention, and I should, he gets overlooked in the shuffle. Charlie Steiner, the voice now, the television voice of the and radio of the Los Angeles Dodgers. Wonderful person, baseball blood, his runs deep, can talk about things above and beyond the game when the game is 20-1. But I've written several stories on Steiner growing up in Brooklyn, and his fabled and favorite voice was Vin Scully. And when he joined the Dodgers after having been with the Yankees, he went home to Brooklyn, where he started talking to his mother, who was rather old by then, saying, "Ma, I made it. I'm talking to the guy who used to broadcast when I was growing up." It was just a wonderful family story.
Curt, I know you're a huge Red Sox fan, and
Not easy.
I'm a huge anti-Yankee fan. So
Oh,
one guy who I love, Ford Frick winner, is Dave Niehaus for
Yes.
his "I don't believe it," especially when Griffey Jr. scored to beat the Yankees. One of my favorite baseball calls. Go ahead.
He was a terrific person, a great broadcaster. He was nominated, I think, and selected as one of the 10 most influential people in Seattle history. This was in the 1990s. He died several years ago, and it was a blow to everyone who knew him. But he simply loved the game. He was without question the greatest personality in Seattle Mariners history. Justice Scully was voted in the 1970s the most memorable personality in Los Angeles Dodgers history. I mean, you know, you're bypassing Drysdale, both Davises, Sandy Koufax, of course, Steve Garvey at that point. The list is endless, but no, runaway winner in Scully.
And one comment about the Giant announcers and one question about Scully. One of my favorite calls also is by Dave Fleming when he kind of loses his voice when Edgar Renteria hits a home run. He sounds like, you know, he's going into puberty, which I love.
It can happen.
And lastly, Vince Scully. I don't understand, how could these announcers have a 3-man booth when I can listen to him speak with nobody and enjoy the game so much more than any broadcast?
Well, who needed a broadcaster with Scully behind the mic? Who would be equal to him with Vin behind the mic? You know, I mentioned Scully with the Dodgers, all of those marvelous years. I remember even as a kid in '63 when they played the Yankees, I hadn't heard Scully before. How could I, growing up in upstate New York? I mean, I was barely a teenager at that point. I missed Scully at Brooklyn. But I hear Scully and I'm thinking, this is really quite amazing. You know, he's poetic, he's fluid, he's lyric, he understands baseball. He played in it for him. One of the teams he played against was Yale's team, captained by the fellow for whom I later worked, George H.W. Bush. Small world. But Scully, in fact, was one man, one booth for many years with the Dodgers, broadcast by himself. He preferred it that way. Who wouldn't? You know, no broadcaster should be. I did a book a few years ago, and I ranked the 100 greatest broadcasters. And I did so on a point scale for those 10. Each of those 10 criteria got 10 points. So 10 by 10, the perfect broadcaster would get 100 points. I absolutely studied this and mulled over it for a number of days before I finally gave Scully 100 points. I mean, nobody should get 100. That means he's the perfect broadcaster. But I thought he was the perfect broadcaster, and I still do. But he certainly, you know, there was an endless trove of stories. Storytelling, as I mentioned earlier, is, of course, the secret of baseball. One of the secrets, the greatest. And Scully was simply, you know, you went to school on Vin. And he never expressed his taste publicly at working with more than one broadcaster. But if you were him, wouldn't you want to work by yourself? Dodger fans did.
And, you know, when you're listening to him when he's over 80 years old and he hasn't lost anything on his fastball, it's unbelievable.
I remember, you know, I loved Chuck Thompson with the Orioles. And I loved some other broadcasters, including Jack Buck. But as they aged, their voices began to fade. Scully's voice didn't fade, even in his 80s. I think part of it was his constitution. Part of it, he didn't drink, he didn't smoke. He took good care of himself. And I remember saying to my wife, he had to be, good grief, 84, 85 at that point. And I turned to my wife and I said, you know, it should be unconstitutional for someone that age to sound that good. But he did.
Thank you. Peter, you're going to wrap it up. Last question of the night.
Sorry about that. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Smith, for being with us tonight.
Thank you. I
Much
appreciate it.
appreciated. This is something that I mentioned before we got started. I have a photo of Phil Rizzuto apparently broadcasting in the booth with Russ Hodges. This is while he was on the injured list,
right,
with the Yankees.
Right.
Did he actually broadcast with the Giants, or was that simply an interview?
I can't find out, and I've tried. My guess is that he was interviewed by Hodges. That was a strange interlude for Rizzuto, because the Baltimore Orioles, who were quite nameless, faceless, and quite bad at the time, in 1956, when Rizzuto was released by the Yankees late in the year, the Baltimore Orioles had him broadcast a couple games. And he could have become the Orioles announcer in the next year, which would have been, pardon me, 1956. But he, or 57 rather, but he didn't want to leave New York. And this then led Rizzuto, I think, to some extent. But Ballantine Beer was particularly involved with this. Ballantine's chairman, as I remember, was a friend of Rizzuto. And they politely told the Yankees that it would be very lovely if Phil Rizzuto could become in 1957 a full-time Giants announcer. And, you know, sponsors talk. They did then and they do now. And so Phil becomes the third Yankee announcer in 1957, and was still going strong when he retired after or about at the end, I should say, of the 20th century. Had a long run. As I said, was not a traditional ball and strike caller. Didn't purport to be. He was quite honest in that sense. He presented himself as he was, as the Scooter, and he was beloved by Yankee fans.
Thanks, Peter. We got time for one more, maybe. Steve, go ahead.
Sure.
Kurt, do you know a gentleman named Joe Mock?
Joe Buck?
Joe Mock, M-O-C-K.
Oh, no, I don't. I'm sorry.
He writes for Baseball America and
Yeah.
a couple of the magazines. He's out of Texas.
Uh-huh.
I do in Arizona what Gary does here, except it's not Giants, it's just sports.
Right.
Joe Mock has been to my place, I don't know, 10 times. Once he rated the stadiums, once he rated the announcers,
Uh-huh.
the league announcers. And I was able to get Denny Matthews from the Royals. And when I run my meetings, I generally wear Giants gear because I'm a Giant fan. This particular meeting, I was wearing my Willie Mays the Cat shirt. And one of the guys in the audience is a Cleveland Indian fan. And he raises his hand when it's time for questions. He says, "Why does that guy always got to wear that shirt?" Matthews goes, "I have an interesting story about the catch." And he looks at me and goes, "You don't mind, do you?" I said, "No." Joe DiMaggio was once asked if he would make the catch. And Joe DiMaggio replied, "I would have made the catch and I wouldn't have lost my hat."
Well, a wonderful quote. I'm not sure that it's true, but of course.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure either.
You're talking about, my goodness, talking about three great announcing teams in New York. What about Duke Snyder, Willie Mays, and Mickey Mantle? Again, I was too young to live through this.
Harvey and I weren't.
Benefit, yeah.
The
but you
corners.
did. And it's spectacular. Denny Matthews, thank you. You know, after a wonderful session like this, first thing I think of, who did I omit? Denny Matthews, who is not simply the voice, but the voice, italicized, of the Kansas City Royals. He
But
joined
Eric
them.
Nadel. Eric Nadel, you know him?
Yes, I do.
Okay, yeah.
Fine announcer with the Rangers. But Denny Matthews had joined Buddy Blattner. Buddy Blattner was the first voice of the Kansas City Royals from 1969 to 76. And then the Royals, I think, wanting a younger voice, named Denny Matthews. Denny Matthews, his father worked on the railroad, and he's a railroad buff, as am I. My grandfather worked on the New York Central. And so that's a bond that we have. He's a wonderful person. He's a member of our Frick committee, of course, and he studies this religiously. And I go to him at least to talk about this before we make choices. And he also, like most writers, is stunningly inept technologically. I fairly admit it. I can't deny a state secret, And so he's just a wonderful guy. He's a member of the Frick recipients, of course. Was elected, I think, in the 1990s at some point. And he used a Jack Brickhouse quote in his acceptance speech. And he says, today, quoting Brickhouse, "I feel 60 feet, 6 inches high." So hard to improve on that.
Curt, listen, first of all, I want to tell you that I somehow lucked into getting you. And not only did I luck into getting you once, but that you agreed to do this twice. Guys, give it up for Curt Smith. Just fabulous. Curt, we can't thank you enough.
Well, great questions as well. I just enjoy this very, very much. And of course, nobody can debate a sport like baseball fans. We all know that. So I thank you for the invite.
We will be in touch, and please don't be a stranger, okay, Curt?
You bet. Thank you. Thank you
Well,
all.
guys, I will be here to close out the room.
Gary, I
Yes.
mentioned earlier about Erskine's book.
Yes.
It's a documentary coming out on the 18th.